Hey, good morning, and thank you for coming back to the channel. It's Monday, September 25th, 2023. I wanna bring up a subject that I think we need to continue to keep in front of us as we think about what's happening with our Second Amendment rights and our freedoms in other areas too. But more specifically, what is happening with uh, uh, the impact on our Second Amendment rights from the three Supreme Court rulings, especially the Bruin decision, and now in California, and hopefully for all of the Ninth Circuit, the the elimination of the magazine ban, which is a uh, an indication of how things are going. But let me turn the Wayback Machine way back for a minute, because this Second Amendment activity represents a major culture war, a cultural shift that's going on in this country. Um, there is a reason that a certain part of the country, including the liberal government, wants to disarm uh, civilians. They do. It's just they have said it so many times. They want to disarm civilians, especially prevent civilians from being armed in public. That is the thing. They do not want us to have the right. They do not want us to be able to carry arms in public, because it represents, in my opinion, it represents a threat to their ability to use government power against us when they feel they need to, and it represents the power of the people to respond when we need to, or in other words, exercise our First Amendment right while exercising our Second Amendment right. A classic example of that was recent in New Mexico. So it is a cultural war, a war for the hearts and minds of the people. Now, make no mistake, this thing that President Biden has done, creating this gun violence group in the White House, is intended to put $14 billion focused on making that happen, focused on getting at who? Young, black, brown children, to convince them that they don't need to use that right, even though it says so in the Constitution. So the war is for the hearts and minds of the younger people coming up. Now, this has happened before. This has happened before, and the impact on America was just as traumatic. Well, what was that? That was the elimination of government-controlled segregation and racial discrimination in this country. Well, Brown versus Board of Education, and by the way, uh, one of my cousins was on the NAACP legal team that argued that in front of the Supreme Court. So I'm very familiar with all that went on. But Brown versus Board of Education was 1954, and it was a cataclysmic trauma to almost half of the country, who felt that black folks needed to be someplace else and separated from white folks and so forth. Uh, it took 10 years, from 1954 to 1964, for half the country to get the memo. In that 10-year period of time, there was a great deal of violence, literally violence, of government entities against the people. Who were the people? They were the people that were marching in the street, right? And it culminated in 1964 with the march across the Selma Bridge, where extreme violence took place. And at that time, the President of the United States, I believe President Johnson, actually saw that on television, and he said, we can't have that anymore. And we had government force, federal force, against the states, saying you cannot continue to do that. They had National Guard have to escort elementary school children to go to school, had to escort college age folks to go to college. It was a terrible trauma, at the time, and remnants of that exist still today. So don't get that twisted. It's just that there's federal law. There is culturally, it's just not done. And culturally, this whole racism thing is not something that is accepted. That is a kind of cultural shift that's going on with respect to the right of the people, you and I, everyone really, to keep and bear arms in public. That is where the fight is. That is where the fight is. And once that is enshrined, just like the Supreme Court ruling against segregation, separate is not equal, was the main theme. And in the middle of all of that was the cultural shift, was the Loving decision. And that struck down, the Supreme Court, laws in the state that said you can't have marriages between races. White people have to marry white people, and black people have to marry black people, and so forth. The Supreme Court struck that down. That was cataclysmic again. This fight for a constitutional enumerated right, it's an enumerated right, is having the same kind of cultural trauma to the country. And government, in this case, federal government and several state governments, where there are most of the people, are terrified. Because once those states, who are they? California, New York, New Jersey, and so forth. Once those states, which have the most people, have their citizens actually exercising that right to be armed in public, that genie's out of the bottle. And the ability of government to bully people is really watered down. And that's where that fight is. That's where that fight is. I make the analogy to desegregation and anti-racism because that was a violent change in culture in this country. The first violent change, obviously, was the Civil War. But the Civil War didn't end anything, really. It just started the ball rolling. Yeah. And so now, what? Well, it's going to be a while. And we are responsible for doing what's necessary to win the culture war. How do we do that? My personal opinion, we have to stop looking like gun people. We have to stop dressing in camo, wearing long fucking beards, wearing those baseball caps and all that stuff like we just came back from the sandbox. Right? We have to stop walking around like soldiers. We have to stop walking around like a dress. This is how I go to work. This is how I go to the range. And I'm dangered up all the time. Right? We have to start looking like regular people. You guys on the YouTube channel, you know who you are. I understand that when you're at the range, you have to wear certain gear just for safety reasons, right? You need to wear long sleeves. You should wear something around your neck because hot brass is a mess. You need to wear a cap. Hot brass is a mess, right? There's some of that. But we don't have to walk around in our regular lives like that. Okay? Now I know that USCCA and some of the other NRA, some of the other marketing, advertising, photographs and videos try to show regular citizens not dressed like they come out of the sandbox. But the regular public doesn't see us that way. They see us as those frustrated soldiers, because that's the only pictures that get out there. We need to do a better job of that, because image is everything. Image is everything, right? When we talk about the Second Amendment, we need to be talking about the right that belongs to everyone, and everyone has a right to use it or not use it, right? It's that kind of conversation. Now, the the idea the idea that uh, guns are dangerous, people with guns are dangerous, is true. It's true, right? An armed populace is a dangerous populace. It's dangerous to those who would harm it. That is a concept that that liberal and progressive people really struggle with. They don't want to live in that kind of world in their minds. We don't want to live. I don't want to live in a world where I'm prey to some predator. Right? I don't want to live in a world where I there's nothing I can do. Right? And I've talked to women who have said they will take the rape before they will kill the rapist. That's how ingrained the thou shalt not kill thing is. And that's kind of where the cultural argument comes into. If you're dangered up, you are willing to use and prepared to use deadly force to protect yourself and your loved ones and the innocent. Right? That is the end result of the Second Amendment, is that the people are dangered up. The people are dangerous. Yes. Criminals use that danger in bad ways. And that's the difference. All of us can be dangered up. But there are laws against criminals doing bad things with their danger capability. That's always been the case. But the cultural idea that citizens have the power to defend themselves with the ultimate force. That is scary to a lot of individual people, and it is terrifying to government. And that's the moral and cultural conflict that we're having right now. And it's going to be a minute. It's going to be a minute. The world, the rest of the world, thinks America is crazy, and really crazy. I think that's good, because that means they'll just leave us alone. But the rest of the world didn't throw off a king. The rest of the world, well, that's not true. In this hemisphere, there was another country that threw off their European masters. And that country was Haiti. But it happened to be a black country. And they threw off their French slave masters. Well, guess what happened to them? They haven't been a right country since. Because the other countries, the European countries, including America, has been punishing Haiti ever since. But we, Americans, we tend to forget that. But in the world, we threw off successfully that government that was punishing us that way and wanted to disarm us. So we did that. The rest of the world doesn't understand. The United Nations, and this I'll say this final thing, the United Nations and the Arms Trade Treaty, also known as the Small Arms Treaty, and the standards, a main component is the total disarmament of civilians in the world. That is what it's in writing. That is what they want to do. That is what the UN wants to do. And countries that subscribe to that treaty, and the U.S. has not ratified that, that's what they're supposed to be about. If you look at all of the things that are in that treaty, right, and all of the things that the anti-gun people in this country are trying to do, they are identical match. They're identical matches. It's almost like the anti-Second Amendment people are planning to have the United States be governed by the United Nations. I mean, I'm just putting that out there. But I digress. The Second Amendment fight, the fight for that particular right, and it is a right, not a privilege, and governments are starting to get that message. It's a cultural trauma, and it's going to take a while because half the country disagrees. The other half wants to make it happen. So I think it's going to go faster than 200 years, but that's where we are. That's where we are. So I kind of rambled a little bit, but I wanted to make that point that this is a cultural fight that we're having, and we're going to win, but at what cost, right? At what cost culturally? So if you like the content of this channel, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Don't forget to do that. Now, it's showing that I have 10,000 subscribers. I don't get that kind of energy from it. I don't feel I'd have 10,000 people out there talking to me, right? But if you want to make some comments, please, we love them. Well, I do anyway. Yeah. And as always, wherever you can, whenever you can, however you can, carry on.